Kalki had checked everywhere. The village was shattered, the huts were destroyed, and most were ransacked. Even though Durukti wanted no more destruction, the Rakshas had sought for it. They showed they listened, but did they really? It was almost sad as Kalki saw his friends, his mother's friends, sprawled across the field where once greenery used to blossom. He watched the dilapidated chariot which he had brought from the city. It was in partial ruins, the wheels missing. In the west, he saw Leela's dead body, surrounded by a retinue of other bodies. And it was over. All the grand plans he had made had come to nothing but futility. He had lost so much and it had deepened his senses and caused him to go into a void of guilt. Kalki began to trudge downwards with the horse. He wasn't a trained horseman, so it took him time to even go down the slope, where there were more huts. With a deep sigh, he went down, staggering, until he saw the isolated huts, where a few more bodies were lying sprawled. The sound of the birds was now replaced by the angry audible grunts. He knew where the sounds were coming from, but who were they? He stopped his horse and got off. With a battle axe on his side, he began to move, crouching slightly until he saw that in the midst of the huts, there was Roshan Mitra, his eyes lifelessly watching Kalki now, as he had been pulled out to the hut's entrance, with a message written in blood, in the Rakshasi language. What kind of creatures would do such a thing to anyone? Lakshmi, he yelled, hoping to hear her reply. He wasn't afraid anymore, since it was no use being afraid. Even if he would die, it would not matter. He felt dead from inside. He yelled again. There was a feeling in his chest that made him realize she must have left for the caves. But did it make any sense? He wondered. She was supposed to be here, and for all he knew, she would stay, even if it meant sacrificing her own life. No. Kalki yelled Lakshmi's name again. But this time, he heard something. Kalk. And her voice trailed off. Kalki began to instantly run towards the direction of the sound, his fingers sweating around the axe. No matter what peril she was in, he'd make sure she was safe. Kalki came forward and finally witnessed the sight. There were 3 Rakshas around her, and she was being dragged on the ground by them. She was being pulled by her long hair. One had forcibly held her legs together. The Rakshas saw each other and then looked at Kalki, dumbfounded. Blazing with wrath, Kalki came forward, his steps trampling the ground, mud spilling around him, and his mouth tasting dry. His feet picked up speed. The Rakshas armed themselves, afraid, for they never thought they would witness someone like this. In the shadows of the sun, Kalki's skin was glimmering darkly. His eyes were of different colors. The Rakshas came forward, one of them with a spear. He threw the javelin across at Kalki, but Kalki's hand came before it, deflecting it. He turned towards the Rakshas and plunged it inside the Rakshas. With the Rakshas on the other end, he pulled him up, impaling him. He pushed the spear into the ground. The other 2 Rakshas just watched the sight. But Kalki didn't have to do anything because Lakshmi immediately came to her feet and knocked the Rakshas with a rock. Kalki flung an axe to her, which she caught by the handle. With the axe in her hands, Lakshmi ripped apart a Raksha's throat, and it was a filthy sight for him. As the blood began to spill over the Raksha's dark chest, he fell down, lifeless. Kalki watched Lakshmi. They shared a moment of quietness. At least, he could save someone. He reached out to her, bidding his feet to move faster so that he could finally embrace her. But he was too slow. His eyes darted over to the shadow that crossed Lakshmi. It was the Rakshas she had hit with the rock. He had a spear in his hand and he plunged it deep inside Lakshmi's chest. With a wavering smile, she sunk on the ground, her head falling flat on the grounds of the village she had a love-hate relationship with. He couldn't even breathe for a moment witnessing what just happened. Everything spiraled around him, but he knew he still had to save her. He didn't use any weapon. Instead, he pounced at the murderous Rakshas, tossing him over, making him fall and beating him until the Rakshas spilled its filthy blood out. The Rakshas didn't go out without a struggle. With strong arms, he pushed him back. Kalki felt an impact, but he tried his best to stand up. He stormed at the Rakshas and knocked him at the back. The Rakshas fell again, but he used his strength to turn him over. "You can't get me," the Rakshas snarled. Kalki tried to break the lock as much as he could, but the Rakshas, twice his size, was stronger. He grabbed for the mud that surrounded them and tossed it over at the Raksha's face. That led to the Rakshas yelling in agony, for the dirt had entered his eyes. Kalki used force and kicked him hard, continuously. He plunged the axe that had fallen away from Lakshmi's hand inside the Raksha's skull. Blood sprayed it over his face, and he wiped it. He had killed it, but no. He began to scamper over Lakshmi. The first thing he did was pull out the spear. All the moments that he had spent with her, right from the childhood to the times when he had saved her so many times, he started seeing in flashes. He was extremely happy the day she had come back, the time he protected her from the crocodile, the times he went to Indragarh and got himself into trouble, and the time he was about to kiss her but was interrupted by Shuko. And yet at this moment, there was no one to disturb them. When they most needed the medical supplies, there was no one. Lakshmi was still in her senses. Her eyes were getting glassy, but was still conscious. Kalki grabbed her by the chest, his arms curving over her back. She was hurt and wounded, and she was coughing up blood. No, this can't be happening. It's all right, fine. We have gone through wars, and we will do it, all right? He was repeating words frantically. All right, no please, don't die on me. He hugged her, kissed her on the head and tried to hold her tight. I'm sorry, she breathed. I have let people down. Her voice was coming weakly. I should have made more effort in trying to find why you are. I know about it now. I was meaning to tell you, Lakshmi. He was tearing up, hot burning rivulets coursing down his cheeks. I am supposed to be some kind of a savior. Savior? A soft smile dancing on her lips. You? He chuckled. I know, right? I don't think they got that right. I know. Kalki clenched his jaw, his smile disappearing. Let's go. No, please. She stopped him, her pale hands lightly touching his chest. Don't do it to yourself. I am. She moaned. I'm a little beyond the saving stage. Kalki contorted his face, his eyes struggling hard not to tear up. But don't let this make you think that you aren't fit to be the people's savior, she said, because I have read somewhere. From all the stupid books, he struggled with a smile. Yes, from all the stupid books, she smiled. And I had read that heroes are born out of tragedies. I don't want to be a hero if I have to go through this tragedy. I just want to be a boy who loves a girl. He clutched her hard. A boy from Shambhala with no care in the world. I just wanted to grow up like that. Slowly her hand reached his cheek. Kalki, we both know that isn't going to happen anymore. Kalki nodded, but he couldn't believe he had lost everything with his one decision. At this moment, he regretted everything about his life. In fact, he was angry at himself for being the avatar. Kiss me, she said, with no disturbance this time. She smiled. Kalki nodded. And he did. He kissed her as softly as he could, their tears slowly mingling with each other. That was when he realized her lips had gone still and cold. And as he looked down, she saw her eyes were closed. She was gone. Kalki's chest heaved, and he yelled, letting all the jackals and the sheep hear him. He yelled so loud that even the birds left their nests. And he yelled loud enough to let his enemies know that he was coming for them. The Rukti had shifted all the villagers to one side, and after the Devdatta incident, no one even dared to come in between her and her objective. They were all made to sit down, with Rakshas walking around them, poking them with spears if anyone even fidgeted. She was so close to her cure, or whatever there was beyond the boulders. She saw Martanja had dug hooks inside the rocks. 5 horses had harnesses wrapped around them, on which Rakshas sat. They began to pull in the opposite direction. With each pull, the boulder moved a little, but it was still stuck around the edges of the cave. Martanja sprinted over to Durukti, who stood at the pathway that led to the caves. He went past the guards and panted for a while before he began. My lady, the boulder seems to be stuck. I think we need to use more labor. Use your men. More, my lady. Durukti clenched her teeth. Is it possible to arrange for more men? If we try, we can see it's possible. Quite a clever answer. Durukti grinned at that as she moved away from her guards and watched the villagers, whimpering in the fields, holding on to each other. For them, she would be the epitome of evil, but she had reasons that they wouldn't understand. All the gods they loved and pleaded to, and yet they didn't know that the Manavs had been alienated after the breaking. Use the natives, answered Durukti. Tell them to work. All right, my lady. Martanja blinked. He left and ordered his men around the villagers, while Durukti thought for a moment. She hadn't disclosed to Martanja what was in there, and she had given him extra money just for not asking questions. But he was a man, that too from the Rakshasi tribe. He was intelligent. he knew there was something valuable inside it. It wasn't just the gold and copper that drove him to pull the boulder out, but it was also inquisitiveness. Martanja was a clever chief who showed he respected Durukti, but he surely had ulterior motives. But as of now, she had to stop second-guessing and start worrying if the caves really held what it said they did. She was afraid, of course. She had made people lose their sons and daughters, their husbands and wives, for her goal. And if her goal was just a waste of time, she would hate herself forever. But more so, she would never forgive Simran, who had started all of this. If it wasn't for her, she wouldn't have ever thought about Soma. The villagers began to work and they started using sickles and knives to cut the overgrowth around the edges. The ones that resisted, the Rakshas subdued them with ropes. Little by little, the boulder started to move from its position. The villagers kept digging at the crevices. It was a painful sight for her, but she was so close to what she had wanted. Durukti! A voice came, startling her, freezing her to the bones. Swiveling her head frantically, she looked where the voice had come from, and she saw it. Standing across her guards was Kalki, with a blood-drenched dhoti, an axe in his hand, his chest caked in dust and blood. He began to run. The harness stopped. Martanja instantly yelled to his guards to chase and stop him. The guards that surrounded Durukti went forth, almost 20 in number, as they grabbed onto him. Kalki was able to stave off most of them, blindly kicking out and punching them, hitting some of them grievously with his axe. His presence here meant that all the guards near the clearing had surely been decimated. How did he escape? You killed everyone, he yelled, his body held back by the Rakshas. I will kill you now, he said through gritted teeth. Men, Martanja announced, kill the peasant. A Rakshas came forward with a blade in his hand, ready to slice off Kalki's head. Durukti knew the end of her misery was near. Simran whispered in her ears before the attack could happen. My lady, you shouldn't hurt an already hurt person. If you must remember, he is special, right? Don't you think when his anger lessens, he can be used to your advantage against the Tiavanbialis who are secretly plotting against Lord Kali and you? Durukti arched her brows. Stop, Durukti yelled, but not just because of what Simran said, but also because she didn't want to upset the villagers any further. Though Simran was right, Kalki had powers like that of the fabled heroes she had read about when she was small. Martanja strolled towards her, interjecting her. I apologize, my lady, but that man is wreaking havoc on our men. We should make an example out of him. He even managed to escape. I wonder what he did back at the camp. He deserves punishment in the city, not here. She looked at him. He killed your men, right? According to the bylaws, he has to be judged in front of the tribal lords and Lord Kali before being punished by death. If Kalki wouldn't turn on her side later after deliberate persuasion, she would simply hand him off to her brother to deal with. She didn't want a headache. I thought, coughed Martanja, coming forward slyly. You wanted all of this to be discreet. Durukti nodded. It'll be, for all they will know, this was a compulsory act to subdue the rebellion that was brewing against the Tiavanbialis. Martanja looked at her for a while, hardly believing that a person could be so cold and calculative yet warm and desirable at the same time at such a young age. Durukti pursed her lips, amused by her improvised plan. I suppose you should continue working, Chief. You don't want to be late. If that boy stays there for long, he's going to crumple your army. Kalki was tied up with a rope, his mouth strapped, with 5 spears close to his neck. Even if he would try to struggle, he would be stabbed. For your sake, just stop moving. I'm trying to save you. Don't force me to kill, Durukti calmly said, trying as much as she could to hold her emotions back, to sound cold. Kalki's eyes spoke 1,000 words. He looked as if he didn't care that she was doing him a favor, and he would rather die than take her up on it. But it was all his anger and hatred towards her that spoke through his eyes. A sentimental person is a dangerous entity. Durukti focused her attention back at the harness. She came forward, her rope slowly tracing the ground. She saw it was near her goal. Her eyes flashed with brilliance. The boulder shifted and maneuvered away from the opening. The horses tried moving faster as the villagers continued to chip away at the rock. And then the rock was pushed apart. They all began to rush away, with some getting trampled under it. Durukti said to Martanja, go and tend to them. I will see the inside. She wanted to get rid of the Rakshas, so that he did not see the so-called Somas. Martanja gave a reluctant nod and moved to the fields with his men. Half of them stayed with the yelling Kalki, as they tried to stop him. He wasn't able to properly shout, for his mouth was closed. Drupadi looked at him unapologetically before moving towards the caves, her heart thumping furiously. You should very well hope I'm going to see something wonderful inside. Otherwise, she eyed Simran, who barely managed to swallow a lump of nervousness. 3 Rakshas followed her. At the entrance, the Rakshas lit the fire lamps, and she could hear how the lamps made a sound when they were lit. It smelled of putrid dampness. When she trained the lamp light against the wall, she didn't see anything. She shot a glance at Simran, who was looking back at her. As she went deeper, Drupadi crossed the walls that were tainted a bright sapphire blue. She saw there were inscriptions carved on it, comprising of various symbols and glyphs. She touched it. The symbol was of an infinity that was wrapped inside a zigzag structure. I'm sorry, my lady. I was told. You know what this is. Drupadi had a pallid face when she asked her foolish handmaiden. This is the symbol of Vishnu the Preserver. She moved towards the other glyph which had a strange design. This is a shape of a horse, a white horse, and she came to the last one, and this is victory. My lady, I thought they were. Her voice had been echoing. Drupadi just noticed. Drupadi shot a finger up against her lips to silence Simran. She walked forward as the cave turned out to be leaking some kind of liquid. She touched it. It was blue in color, perhaps tainted with the color that had leached from the. Speak again now, she instructed the girl. Yes, meekly Simran said. Loudly, girl, rasped Drupadi. But she couldn't really hear Simran's voice, for her own voice echoed so much that Drupadi knew what it was. Drupadi grabbed the fire lamp from one of the Rakshas and tossed it across to the front. My lady, exclaimed Simran. But what the lamp did was extraordinary, as it broke forth, and the fire caught on. The light was emitted, and lo and behold, the wall in front of them morphed with blue stones protruding out jaggedly. The funny part was, it had been the fire that led her to the Somas. This is it, she said. Simran's face brightened. Yes, madam, I was right. Drupadi came forward with a smile dancing on her lips, touching the blue fossil, and with a snap of her finger, she broke it. It had seemed crystalline from afar, but was in fact quite malleable and soft. And as she chipped away at the ends, a strange blue liquid poured out over her skin. She smelled it, but it smelled of nothing. She dipped her finger and even tasted it. It was just some liquid. Are you sure this is it? Simran beamed. Yes, ma'am. We have just found the cure for your brother. And despite the smile she gave, there was something unsettling about it that Drupadi couldn't understand. But perhaps it was her unwarranted suspicion that probed her into thinking this. Perhaps she should be happy. And she struggled with a smile, even though she knew to save one. Plenty of lives had been lost. Arjun had been seeing it all. It was a day after the entire pack of Rakshas with Drupadi had left, that they had emerged. Till then, they had subsisted on fruit scavenged from the ground. Exhausted, Arjun walked on the path of Shambhala again, trudging away from people who eyed at him, Kripa and Bala, for they were all accessories to what had happened here. But he paid no heed. The corpses were being picked, the pyres were being lit. As they reached his home, which had been untouched by all the violence, Arjun spoke up. You should have let me go and get yourself killed, Kripa said, glancing at Bala. You talk crazier than your brother sometimes, mate. Arjun had been dragged by Bala when he saw what happened to Kalki. Arjun, Kripa and Bala were making their way towards the caves after gathering enough weapons and supplies when they saw Kalki had already reached and he was being trapped by so many Rakshas, unable to move, forced by them to kneel so he could be subdued. He was bounded and gagged by them. Arjun wanted to move and attack, but Kripa stopped him. You will meet your brother's fate. The lady of the court likes your brother, but not you. So beware, Kripa warned. Arjun didn't listen to the old man, for he always talked idiotically, but it was Bala who knew it was the end. They couldn't do anything that would save Kalki. They had to be smart. Where is Lakshmi? Arjun asked, standing beside his hut in the present. Kripa and Bala exchanged glances. All right, this is not going according to the plan. Arjun clenched his fist. To be fair, mate, we didn't have a plan in the first place, Kripa said, but at least we were able to survive and so did Kalki. That was grand, in its own way. Arjun nodded. He glanced at the village once again. More than half the residents had been killed. I can't stay here, and I hope you don't, because now, Kripa beamed. Now, nothing. Arjun stopped, as he began to walk inside the hut, rummaging through the things, picking up his clothes. For some reason, The very thought of him entering and being greeted by his mother was something he was looking forward to. But there was no family, and Arjun was glad he had sent his mother away, for he knew it would have only resulted in her going down the road like the others. The thought created a powerful knot in his chest. "Where do you plan to go?" The old man fidgeted. He bored him to death. He was a guru and he couldn't even teach a bunch of villagers to fight. It was also his fault. "I don't know. Not decided it yet." Bala kept his palm on Arjun's shoulder to stop him. It was heavy, he could feel, but also sticky with blood. Arjun just realized he hadn't bathed after the war. He had to take a dip in the lake perhaps, but then the lake would be filled with the ashes of the men and women who died for a lost cause. "We need to help your brother. He's gone." Arjun wrapped a long dupatta across his chest, and he used another to wrap a bundle of clothes for him to carry. "And he's dead. We can't give up like that." "Mate, I know you feel disheartened." "Disheartened?" snapped Arjun. "That's an understatement. I feel horrible. I feel like I was supposed to die in his place. There are people out there who hate us, hate my family. I can't even bring my mother back here. Shambhala is no more the place it used to be. It's all over. The savior of mankind, well, he's rotting in some jail perhaps." Kripa shrugged. "Kind words for your blood. He's not my blood. I am not anyone's blood." Kripa arched his brows. "I don't know what that was about, but the fact that you want to leave for somewhere is stupid. You can't do this to the people. You owe it to your brother, to protect him." "Oh, he didn't owe anything. Not to anyone." He walked to his room to pick up his things. With a heavy heart, he looked through the important books he could use for the journey to somewhere. The thought scared him, but perhaps he could go to mother. But then, she would ask so many questions, and he'd be afraid to answer them, especially that Kalki was not returning back anytime soon. But what really put him off? Was it the people, or was it the inevitability of their defeat? Was it failure that scared him? Ever since the time in Gurukul, he had been winning. Even with the Mlechas, he had won with Kalki. All of those times, failure was just a word for him. But now it had become his reality. And that was when his eyes darted and he noticed a sickle. It was the same weapon his mother had given him when he was going out there to find the Mlechas. He had barely used it during the fight against the Mlechas, as it was taken by them. He had later retrieved it from their tent, but never once he cared about it. Looking back now, he felt instead of bows and arrows, he should have just stuck to using the sickle. Cowards give up after a defeat, but those who get up after the defeat are the real winners. Why was he giving up on finding Kalki? His mother had told him to stay together, to never separate. So why was he giving up at all? What had happened? He stood there in silence, viewing his culpability in the entire turn of events. Something had taken over me. Perhaps it was guilt, sadness and failure, he said to himself, shaking his head. "Well, it'll be dishonest if I say it isn't entertaining to see you mutter to yourself." Kripa grinned cheekily. "But can I ask what you are thinking about, with that thing in your hand?" Arjun turned. The voices were back, and the momentary but deafening silence had vanished. He sighed, as he began. "What will happen to Shambhala if we leave? Let me tell you a story." Kripa stretched his arms as he calmly sat on the mat where Arjun slept at night. Years back, a war had happened, more or less close to the breaking. The war was pathetic in its outcome. Many lost their lives, and many forgot about it. It was the worst war, like the Mahayuddha? Arjun asked, recalling the time of Lord Arjun, from whom he had received his name. Arjun played a pivotal role in that, being an archer of unprecedented fame. Kripa gulped nervously. "Well, more or less, the Mahayuddha was something that stretched for years." "Yes, and many towns, villages and cities were burnt. The biggest war of all time. It had affected millions of lives. After that, the breaking caused a worse impact. It was in the aftermath of the Mahayuddha." Kripa shook his head. "Regardless of whatever had happened, my point is that this country has seen so much wars, but it always stands up on its feet and moves on. It takes time, but it heals. Everything heals if you have patience." Arjun nodded. "And sometimes, you or I can't do anything about it. We cannot hasten the process. We can just watch it happen." Arjun felt Kripa was now talking to himself more than to him. But then he snapped back with his grin. "All said and done, I suppose I made my point, and if I didn't then you must believe I'm extremely tired since I haven't slept or drank. Dear me, I haven't drunk at all. I need to visit Madira's chalais." Bala heaved aloud. "Or not," Kripa nervously chuckled. whatever our great, big friend says we should do. Arjun always believed the books, whatever they taught, but things were always contradictory. At one moment, someone wrote something, and at another, it meant something else. They were unreal. Rakshas were often considered beastly, paranormal, and straight from hell. But when seen up front, they were wise. Dangers show, but they had an air about them. They weren't so beastly after all. The world he lived in, it was full of relative contradictions and subjectivities. What was true or false, it depended on a person's normativity. What do you plan to do then? Arjun asked. Oh, finally, clapped Kripa childishly. I'm glad you are on track, mate, because I have a very innovative plan. Bala nodded. Speak, foul mouth. We are going to Indragarh, where he is being taken. And we need to free Kalki and take him to the north, to my well, not friend, but yeah, someone I know because the Somas is out. We didn't see them taking anything. Arjun still didn't believe in the myth of the Somas, but seeing Kalki in his glory had basically turned around his judgments. Kripa interjected. Oh, they did, because there was a whole lot of it. They must have taken in bulk. And just be sure, if that little blue liquid is out there, we are in great trouble because there is going to be a lot of bad things we shall need to reckon with. And we need your brother to fight it. For that, he needs to be prepared and not be a fool and confront a court aristocrat out in the open, in front of her 50 or so guards. That boy lacks wisdom, but he makes up for it with his bronze. Arjun glanced at Bala. All right, so what's the plan? I just told you. You explained to us what would happen if we don't help Kalki, Arjun said. But what is the plan to release him from the prison or from his execution? Kripa thought for a moment. There was a brief silence. We will go to Indragarh. All right, Arjun nodded. So did Bala. Then, Kripa smiled like a wizened man. We improvise. And Arjun reluctantly nodded, thinking one thing. Here we go again.
Vishnu.